think she froze again.
Yeah, I think she did.
So Brad, while we're waiting, oh, she's back. Okay.
She's
I'm
back.
back. Okay, I just grabbed a different room in hopes that this will work better. I apologize for that. Cindy,
Yeah.
please continue, because in the spirit of dedicating this study to Rabbi David's, I want to hear more about what makes him so righteous.
Well, I don't know how much, if you missed what I said, but just his kindness, his knowledge, he knows the right thing to say, his view of the world, you know, where he's connected so many places, he does so much good. He's just
Beautiful.
one of the most wonderful people I've ever met.
Oh,
And I think also, to add to that, how he treats us or any of us in any situation, and how he teaches us. He has taught us, and I took classes from him, I can't tell you how many years ago, that I just always felt like not just that I learned something I never knew, but it was how he taught it, and the values that he taught whenever he would teach.
I love this.
He also gave us peace.
How is that?
With his knowledge and with his ideas and how he presented it to us, how human beings are supposed to behave. And he did that. And so if you had some kind of upheaval in your life, you could see it from other perspective.
Ooh, okay. This is fantastic. And I actually, maybe we're not gonna top this, right? So let's stick with this. But all of these lessons from Rabbi David's should be in us. And they, you know, the tradition teaches that Abraham Joshua Heschel taught that we have textbooks or texts, but we also have text people. So he's a text person for us, that we should learn his text, right? And in all of the ways that you've said. So as we say, lahavdil, to not make a direct comparison at all, we're going to now look to a mixed bag in the Torah, and that is Noach, because this is Parshat Noach. And we're going to look a little bit at this Torah portion. I'll share my screen with you in a moment. And the guiding question for us today is, what does Noach teach us about righteousness or being righteous, both from what he does and from what he does not do? So this is why this is not a direct, this is why I say in contrast to Rabbi David's, we're talking about all of the Torah he teaches through the good things that he does do. For Noah, I want us to look at the Torah he teaches, that his text teaches, both from what he does and what he doesn't do. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment. This is hard because I grabbed my laptop and I don't have my second screen. So I'm going to do my best here. Okay. And I know you can all see all of my windows that are open. And I just need to move things so I can see better. Give me one moment. Here we go. Okay. So, but to look, even though our Torah portion is Parshat Noach this week, to be able to weigh in on this question, we actually have to go back to the last number of verses from last week's Torah portion, because Noach is introduced at the end of last week's Torah portion. So when humankind began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, the males among the divine beings saw how pleasing the human women were and took wives from among those who delighted them. Adonai said, my breath shall not abide in humankind forever, since it too is flesh. Let the days allowed them be 120 years. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth. These are these like divine, kind of mystical, angelic creatures that appear later in the Torah as well. It was then and later too that the Nephilim appeared on earth when divine beings cohabited with the human women who bore them offspring. Such were the heroes of old, the men of renown. Adonai saw how great was human wickedness on earth, how every plan devised by the human mind was nothing but evil all the time. And Adonai regretted having made humankind on earth with a sorrowful heart. I just want to point out before I read any more, we are still in here because we haven't moved to this week's Torah portion. We're still in the very first Torah portion, the Torah portion of creation. And here, God is already regretting having made humankind on earth with a sorrowful heart. Adonai said, I will blot out the earth, humankind, from the earth, humankind whom I created, humans together with beasts, creeping things, the birds of the sky, for I regret that I made them. But Noah found favor with Adonai. And that's how last week's Torah portion ends. We skip to the beginning of this week's. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. Noah walked with God. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. That was a part of the story of creation we don't often hear, but any thoughts or reactions about what we're learning from Noah or the generation around him? Brad, was your hand up? No? Okay. Susan, go ahead. Oh, Susan, you're muted. You're muted.
Well, it says right to the point, Noah was righteous in a world that was not, and the ones around him were corrupt. And this just made me think, was Noah born of the Nephilim and the beautiful women? We don't know, do we?
Oh, so perhaps he was kind of
Righteous and
superhuman in a way. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I never thought of it before. But now that you introduced the ending of the last chapter, the Nephilim, who were probably, I've read that they were fallen angels, so they weren't so righteous, and they lusted after human women. So here you have something like Greek mythology that a divine being mates with a human woman. That's just another spin, and I haven't read it anywhere, but now that you brought that up, I'm questioning.
I love that. I love that. I don't know of any commentary that says it. It's very possible, but you're right that these Nephilim are the very first manifestation of we like to think about the clear division and truthfully in our tradition, there needs to be a very clear division between God and humanity. But maybe there's some gray area, or there's not such a direct, there's not such a separation that God is God and humanity is humanity, but there's something there. I mean, the separation, they're distinct, of course. We are not God ever, right? But maybe there's something in that. So I love that. Benjamin, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi Leah. I'm a little confused. Here we see God is creating people essentially in his image, right? So there's assuming some perfection or something about that. And God is right or knows all. How did he create these people that were so terrible and so quickly he's judged them as being bad? I mean,
so quickly, and not just judging them as being bad, but ready to destroy everything.
Yeah, and the animals too, like everything Boy, that's I guess a good thing he had an eraser on his pencil.
Great. I'm glad everybody else is raising their hands because I would not know how to answer your question. Merle, why don't you go ahead?
So to this day, every time I read this Torah portion, I sit there and say to myself, what makes Noah so special? Why did Noah, and I mean, I don't know if there is an answer.
Well, that's exactly what we're looking at today. So maybe by the end, you tell me if you have an answer by the end of this session. I don't know. But there's actually, I think there's something there, but that's exactly what we're going to look at in just a moment. What makes him so special? And really, what are the lessons about righteousness he has to teach us? Cindy, go ahead.
First of all, about how long after Adam and Eve is this?
It is taught that it's 10 generations between, it's not really clear, between, well, actually 11 between Adam and Eve's son and Noah, and then another 10 between Noah and Abraham. But I mean, that's all Midrash anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand why he was so righteous and chosen, but I think the fact that once he was chosen, he really followed God's word to build the ark. And I'm sure everyone around him mocked him and questioned him, but he really stayed strong in his faith in God.
Okay, so perhaps the answer is his faith in God. Maybe that is what makes him so special in a world of chaos, to maintain faith. And again, we are just starting it's the very first verse of the second Torah portion. We are right at the beginning.
This is way before Abraham, where the concept of one God and no idolatry.
Exactly. So from a literary perspective, especially, it would make perfect sense that this is something that needs to be established from the very beginning. And this is the very beginning. So maybe the answer to Merle's question is his faith in God. Maybe. So, I want to, Susan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, he did that faith. I think that's a good point. And that later comes in the next parasha of Abraham's faith in God, essentially to get up and leave. And then I'm going back. I know this is tricky and this is minutia, but we had some class on the Nephilim, which are really weird things. They're supposedly fallen angels. So they disobeyed God and came and then made it with humans. Now, some of that could cause some of the evil. The other thing is the lessons of Cain killing. And we also got a sense of right and wrong thanks to Eve. However, individuals have free will. So the free will could make them evil too. So which apparently they did. But I think the rabbis debate, what was it with Noah, which is what you're bringing up, that made him righteous? So.
That's right. And I love that this is the beginning. I think about this every year, that this comes at the very beginning. Everything you just said, Susan, these are like, what bigger questions are there in the world about values? Right versus wrong, faith versus idolatry, godliness versus evil. This is the big contrast of black and white. And yet, from the very beginning, we are stuck in the gray area, right? And I want to go back to that last verse, which is the first verse of this Torah portion, and look a little bit more closely because, and it was already pointed out, but I want to focus on one phrase in there because there's, I think, a nuance for us to perhaps get somewhere with this, because we don't know, but okay, this is the part. This is the line of Noah. Noah was a righteous man. He was blameless in his age. Noah walked with God. And it's this part that I have in I guess orange here. He was Noach ish tzadik tamim haya bedorotav. He was righteous, blameless in his age, or another way to translate that directly from the Hebrew would be he was an ish tzadik tamim. We're going to look at that phrase, a purely righteous man, Bedorotav, in his generation. And this was already raised. So we have a little text here at the bottom. I'll make it bigger if I can. There we go. From Rashi. Does anyone want to read this comment from Rashi? Merle, go ahead.
In his generation, some of our rabbis explain this word to his credit. He was righteous even in his generation. It follows that he had lived in a generation of righteous people. He would have been even more righteous owing to the force of good example. Others, however, explain it to his discredit. In comparison with his own generation, he was accounted righteous. But had he lived in the generation of Abraham, he would have been accounted as of no importance.
And that's from the Talmud.
Oh, from Sanhedrin. Okay.
Okay.
That's all. Yeah.
Just to make sure we're following this, what does anyone want to take a shot at what Rashi is trying to explain here?
Depending on what generation he lived in, how he would have been described as righteous or how he would have done righteous deeds. I'm sorry, Sydney, I saw your hand
Okay.
after I.
Go ahead.
Fine.
Well, that was good. That was good. That was good. Cindy, do you want to say more?
Well, kind of agreeing with Mara, but that if this was kind of a time of lawlessness and he followed some rules, that he was better than the people around him. But if he had been born in a different generation, a different time compared to the others, he wouldn't have been that special.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's just a fluke of when he happened to be born. Perhaps. Susan.
I think he's always compared, the rabbis compare him to Abraham. That Abraham takes a stance and argues with God and vis-a-vis Sodom and Gomorrah. But Noah, there's no discourse that he's saying, how come only me and my family, and the animals. So they compare it to different righteousness to different tzaddiks.
Great. Thank you. So perhaps because he managed to be somewhat righteous, because he happened to be righteous coming out of this generation, this terrible generation, the fact that any righteousness could emerge from that perhaps makes him extremely righteous. On the other hand, maybe it's just the opposite.
Yeah, right.
Right. So I don't know, maybe righteousness is relative. And not only, and we're going to look at another word here, not only was he righteous in his generation, not only was he a tzaddik, which is the same word we know as tzedakah, justice or righteousness, but it says he was a tzaddik tamim. And tamim is this, we're going to look at this in a moment. Tamim most often is translated as pure. Holy, W-H-O-L-L-Y. Holy a tzaddik. But then it qualifies it in his generation. He was ish tzaddik tamim bedorotav. He was completely, fully righteous in his generation. It's almost like the Torah can't decide whether it is objective or subjective. Okay, so, but you pointed out correctly that the comparison is made to Abraham. And so we just read that from Rashi, but I want us to look at Abraham, the way he gets described in this regard. So we already looked at last week's Torah portion. Now we're going to get a little window into next week's Torah portion. Just one verse where this pops up from next week's Torah portion. This is the end of next week's Torah portion. When Abraham was 99 years old, when Avram, he wasn't Abraham yet. When Avram was 99 years old, Adonai appeared to Avram and said to him, I am El Shaddai, walk in my ways and be blameless. Now, any thoughts about that before we looked? I'm gonna scroll down so you can't see the commentary yet. Any thoughts about what that helps us, right? The comparison is made, but what is that? What is the comparison there? Merle.
Was he saying that you need to be as righteous as in before your generation? Not mentioning Noah's name yet. It's a
You mean,
guess.
I'm not, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. You mean, is that the description of Abraham or Avram at this
That
point?
you should be as righteous as your prior generation,
Ah,
being Noah.
interesting. Perhaps, right? One generation builds on the last. Every generation builds on the last. There's a clue here because the word righteous is not used here for Abraham, even though the rabbis
No.
compare Noah in righteousness to Abraham, to Avram. But there's a different thing that they share in common, and it's here. That's why I colored the text here.
Oh.
Well, actually, I colored the wrong part, so never mind. Cindy, go ahead.
I know we're not there yet, but Abraham with Sodom and Gomorrah tried to save others and argued with God for them, but Noah does not try to save other humans.
That's exactly right. Well, yes. And it's on this text page. So we're going to get to that exact thing. Perhaps this is about the response. The response. So actually, let's skip to that in just a moment, and then we'll come back to this other thing. But before we do that, and I realize I colored the wrong thing. I put it in bold, but black. Okay, so go back to the Noah line. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his age. We already talked about that. Noah walked with God, right? Eta Elohim hitalech Noach. He walked with God. Hold on to that for a moment and go back to this part. Avram is being told, I am El Shaddai, walk in my ways and be blameless. And actually, that's not a great translation. Let me, on the spot, translate it a little bit more literally because I think it's helpful. Here it's in Hebrew, hit halach lifanai. God is saying, walk before me and be blameless. Walk before me and be blameless. That's what God is telling Abraham. Noah walks with God. So what's the difference between walking with God and walking before God? There's one we don't think about all the time.
Well, I don't know. I can't answer that right now. I have to cogitate and meditate on it.
This
But
is perfect. Cogitate away.
yeah, but one is the Noah interestingly walked with God, and here God is instructing Abram. He's not even Abraham yet to
Mhm.
walk in his way. So that's more of an instruction to him. He's saying, do this, walk in my ways. Whereas with Noah, he already was doing it. And if we could,
Noah was walking with God.
okay, but he was already doing it.
Yes, correct. Which is what makes him righteous in his
Right.
generation, right?
And God is El Shaddai here. Was there another word for God with Noah? It wasn't out of Noah yet, it was
It's
Elohim.
I think it's ha Elohim gets used. Vayar v'nei ha Elohim gets used, which is a more common phrase. I'm glad you raised that. El Shaddai, if you've heard that phrase, it really means God's. It's most often understood as kind of God Almighty, and it comes from the word dayenu, right? Die, right? Like when we sing Dayenu at the Passover Seder, it means enough. It would have been enough. God, who is enough in God's shed die, who is die enough, you know. So it has to do with, it really puts God in a separate place. I'm glad you pointed it out. It's not by accident that this phrase, that name for God gets used here. It's not very common, but there's a reason for it, because here God is really being, God is the standard bearer for righteousness, for sure. Right? And so this is God Almighty. Not that all the other names of God aren't amazing, right, as well, but this one all the more so.
Is it Shaddai with the breasts? Wasn't that the also? Is that the one?
Say that again?
Well, there's one name for God that comes from breasts, and I think some of that.
Oh,
is-
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Brad, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this question of walking before God or walking with God. It seems to me that when you walk before God, you're given more agency than you are when you're just walking with God.
That's very powerful. Yeah. As if walking with God, I mean, that's pretty incredible to walk with God. But when you compare it to the agency, I love that word agency that comes when you walk before God. It's almost like sacred chutzpah, right? Right? To walk before God. It's not behind God, it's before God, in front of God. That's beautiful. Thank you. Kathleen.
Hi. My interpretation is if you're walking with somebody, you are more of an partner or an equal. Whereas if you're walking in front of somebody, it's almost like you're not equal. You're a little bit below them, or you're announcing them.
Oh, like the
Yeah.
advanced time, the advanced team, right?
Yeah. And you're
Got
certainly not equal. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Right? Different ways of thinking about it. I had thought about it as this chutzpah of going in front of God, but maybe it is, making this, clearing the path for God.
Yes. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you. Susan and then Merle.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you just didn't lower your hand? Okay.
I'm thinking that walking before God, God is expecting you to set the pace, to set the example. Maybe?
I love that. And when we think about how these first chapters, these beginning narratives of the Torah evolve, I think that might kind of help to illustrate how God grows as well, and grows to understand humanity, that humanity is not perfect. Humanity is far from perfect. That's beautiful. So again, we find this strange thing that Noah is righteous, purely righteous, and it's relative to his generation, whether that's good or bad, right? Maybe his generation makes it even, because he's coming from his generation, makes him even more righteous, or maybe, like Rashi said, coming from the Talmud, if he lived at a different time, he would just be an average Joe. But instead, he was Noah. Susan.
I think it's not either or, it's both and, because I think of the Teshuvah and the concept that bait Teshuvah, those who return to Judaism, or those who have sinners who have given up, are deemed even more, are given even more value because they overcame. I mean, this is like analogous. They overcame their disability, and how much more if when you're living in a corrupt society, how much more heroic is it to be one of the pure? So all I'm saying is it can be both. Yes, I mean, he could be both really righteous for his own generation, which was corrupt, and Abraham could be more righteous, but he was in a different generation. So it could be, you could value him for both.
Absolutely. And isn't that kind of the nature of being an upstander human being? That it's yes and it's both. It's both. I think there's a lot. there's a lot to learn from this. We're not going to dive into this, but I think about the lessons. The reason I was drawn to this part of the Torah portion in preparing for today is I really was thinking about, I had just cast my ballot, dropped my ballot in the ballot box, and thinking about the chaos that's around us right now, specifically with regard to leaders and leadership. But we're not going to, go too into that. But I think that regardless of, this isn't about partisan politics. This is a question of society and its leaders, and what is the bar to which we aspire, that we aspire to hold ourselves, and that the bar to which we hold our leaders accountable. Yes, it's relative, and at the same time, righteousness is righteousness, and being godly is being godly. There is the overarching goal of the biblical scholars call it imitio Dei, imitating God.
Yeah.
Right? That is the goal of humanity, to imitate God. We're never going to be God, and that is clear from the beginning. We already saw that in the story, in these verses, right? We are not God, but we ought to take our inspiration to be as much like God as we are humanly capable of being. Okay, so back to the question of what Noah actually has to offer us about this. I want to look at a little bit more commentary, comparing Noah to Abraham. And you already caught on to this. The Midrash teaches, commenting on this phrase, that Noah walked with God, and Brad's point is well taken. It says, in the case of Abraham, scripture says, go before whom I walked. And now this is, I know we're kind of hopping all over Genesis here. This is the nature of Torah study often. But to really understand it, we need to be moving around. That the Midrash here is looking not just at this verse from Genesis 17, but later when Avram really is Abraham. In the case of Abraham, scripture says, go before whom I walked. Noah needed God's support to uphold him in righteousness. And this is exactly the case you made, Brad. Abraham drew his moral strength from himself and walked in his righteousness by his own effort. Right? That maybe Noah needed God to hold his hand and walk with him. Would that be so terrible? Does that make him any less righteous? To need God's help? I would argue that no. I would argue that it's understandable. This is a brand new thing, and Noah's trying to figure it out, and he's living in a generation of absolute, terrible chaos. So much so that God's ready to destroy God's creation. And so maybe this shows a humanity, right? That Noah needs to walk with God. Noah needs to take his lesson from God. So with that in mind, I want to share with you a little teaching from the Kotzker Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, who I think offers us something about the difference between walking righteousness and walking with God versus walking before God. And he talks about what he calls a tzaddik in pelts. A tzaddik in pelts. A pelts is a fur coat. A righteous person in a fur coat. And what the Kotzker Rebbe teaches is that he says when it's winter and it's freezing cold, again, not Los Angeles or Arizona, right? This is Eastern Europe. When it's winter and it's freezing cold, there are two things a person can do. One can build a fire, or one can wrap oneself in a fur coat. In both cases, the person is warm. But when one builds a fire, all who gather around will also be warmed. With the fur coat, the only one who's warmed is the one who wears the coat. So just a little midrash or a little narrative, a little story to give us some basis for comparison. It's freezing cold amongst humanity, amongst creation. Who's wearing, between Noah and Avram, who's wearing a fur coat and who is building a fire? What's the comparison here? Does anyone want to take a guess?
Well, Noah is not building the fire for other people and possibly wearing the fur coat, but I'm not sure that's totally applies to Abraham either. I love the story, and I love the comparisons that you bring out between the statements. I hadn't even considered that, between walking in his ways and then one of Noah and Abram. But I'm not sure, how does it apply to Avram? Avram, or other than maybe he's spreading the word of monotheism, would that be it?
Oh, possible. I like that. I was thinking of something else. We'll get to it, but your case is very well taken. Very possible. And probably it's a combination. I mean, of course, Noah, we meet briefly. Avram, we have over the beginning, for many, many chapters, I will say, we get to know Avram a little bit more, and we watch him develop more than we watch Noah develop.
Right. And the Sodom and Gomorrah is his big story. I mean, that's the big point, that they say that he cared for others. But are there other carings for others? And would we get more into Avram? And maybe it's because it's Avram, not Abraham yet. But he does some things that are kind of reprehensible, or
Right. That's the point. Even Avram, all of our ancestors, Abraham, all the mamas and the papas, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, they are all so powerfully and in such a flawed way human. And yet there are matriarchs and our patriarchs. This is how we learn. There's a really powerful lesson in here. So we're going to look a little bit more, but to give you a sense of where we're headed, I was thinking about the Sodom and Gomorrah stuff. So if you don't know what we're talking about, hang in, we'll be there in a moment. Anyway, so all of the above, to your point, all of the above. Benjamin.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was thinking with Avram as walking in front of God as more akin to like a drum major leading this band of people behind, or this band behind. So then more akin to building the fire, is to lead them to, I don't know, a warm place, a cave, or lead them somewhere towards righteousness, as opposed to walking alongside of God where you're not really a leader. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It makes perfect sense. Absolutely. But I love that image of the drum major, right? Guide people. And by the way, how perfect that it's Avram, Abraham, because the very name of the Torah portion, and again, I'm sorry if I'm confusing with all the back and forth, but this is the nature of Torah study sometimes. Lech lecha. That's how we first meet Abraham. He's getting called upon to go somewhere, to not stay where he already is. He's the whole starting point for our encounter with Abraham when he's Avram is God telling him to get up and go to some new, different place. So is he walking in front of God? Well, he's walking lifnei Adonai. That's what the Torah tells us, not with God, as opposed to Noah, who's walking with God. Thank you for that. Merle.
I'm thinking where you asked about the coat versus the fire. I'm thinking that the coat is leadership preparedness. And the fire is, well, we don't have coats, so we have to build a fire. I mean, last night we were all outside at a friend's house, and it suddenly got cold, and he's running to get his electric fireplace. And some of us wore jackets and warmer clothes. But, I left the house prepared. Arnie left the house, said, I don't need a coat. It's not going to be that cold. And it was it got, by 7 o'clock, even earlier, it was freezing. The kids were out trick-or-treating and they were warm because they knew better at that moment.
Right.
But I'm just thinking of it as how leaders prepare the people that are following them.
So in some ways, it's kind of like putting on your own oxygen mask, like the instruction on the plane, put on your own
Right.
oxygen mask before someone else's.
Right.
Right. Because
Same concept.
it's a similar, it's interesting. It's an interesting comparison. It's not a direct line, but there's a real lesson to be learned because the Kotzker Rebbe is not saying is get yourself a coat and then get a coat for somebody else. Right? Or it's not a dichotomy. It's not, a binary. You choose either get yourself a coat or get a coat for your people. But there is a comparison. Get yourself a coat or light a fire. And the thing about the fire is that it does keep you warm and other people. It serves yourself, the leader, and the others. The difference is, and this is where I think your analogy is great, especially the day after Halloween when everybody's outside, is that the leader is frozen. The leader cannot light a fire. Right? So there has to be some self-care for the leaders. So it's similar. I like that. So what are Avram and Noah doing that they share in common, and where are they very different kinds of people going out into the world or responding? And as the case may be, they're really responding to the world. So let's look back at both of different sections with this question of a coat, fur coat, or a fire. If we look back to Noah, someone want to read these verses from Genesis chapter 6? I'll read them. Anybody? Oh. Okay, go ahead, Susan.
I can read it. God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all flesh.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go up just above that verse.
Okay. When God saw how corrupt the earth was, for all flesh had corrupted its ways on earth. Well, that also includes the animals there.
Mm-hmm. All flesh. Yep.
So God said to Noah, I've decided to put an end to all flesh, for the earth is filled with lawlessness because of them. I'm about to destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make it an ark with compartments and cover it inside and out with pitch.
Great. Thank you. So what's the response? And we could have kept going. And this is really, these are just the first few verses of this week's Torah portion. What is the response that God is telling Noah to have here?
He's going to create a flood, which we know it doesn't say flood here, but he's going to destroy all these other living beings on earth. And he's telling him, build an ark, the purpose of which is to ride out the flood.
Ride out the storm, right? In other words, get yourself a fur coat because it's going to get very cold out on Halloween.
Right.
To mix all of our metaphors, right? Prepare yourself, Noah. And God is telling Noah to do this. Build the ark. And what does Noah do? And we could have read it all and, but you get the idea. Noah does exactly what God tells him to do. He walks with God, right? He does exactly. Build it, fill it with pitch, do it to these dimensions, bring on the animals twosies by twosies. And that's exactly like the song says. And that's exactly what he does, right? And how does it fare for Noah?
He escapes the flood, and his family, and two of each of the species who don't fight on board the ship or eat one another.
Right. Who survives? Just like you said, Noah, his family, and enough of each species that Noah chooses that will not destroy each other and have the capacity to procreate and to carry on the line, to make sure that destruction does not happen. But what does Noah not, in doing what God tells him to do, what does Noah not do?
Well, he doesn't want, what we said before, he doesn't warn the others or take on widows, orphans, and strangers. So,
Right. He's not really building a fire, is he?
no, he's building the coat.
He's wrapping a really lovely coat around, well, maybe it's so lovely. I'm sure after a while it wasn't so lovely, but he wrapped the coat around himself, basically himself and his family and the animals, right? Is that so terrible?
Yes.
How is that so terrible? Great. Let's give it some real meat here. What's so terrible about what Noah did?
Can I talk?
Please.
I think it's selfish, and that's one of the big sins that humanity still has. He did not think of anybody else except himself.
Great. Any response? Thank you for saying that. That is definitely there if that's how we understand it. So any thoughts, any responses to that? You're hardly the first person to say that, right? Benjamin, go ahead.
It's God says to Noah, I'm going to destroy everybody and, animals and people. That's a pretty big burden for him to carry. And he doesn't warn, like I said, doesn't warn anybody, doesn't try to save other families or what have you. So it does kind of cut both ways. It just seems, yes, righteous, but could have he done more? Maybe tell people, hey, clean up your act, stop being so terrible, and God will not think of us as being an awful bunch of people.
Right. And that's, by the way, that's what later, that's what all of the prophets are tasked with doing, right? Go tell the people, clean up your act, exactly what you just said. Clean up your act and maybe things will be okay. But if you don't clean up your act, just be forewarned, destruction is coming. But the prophets come much later.
Yeah.
Kathleen.
On the other hand, he was obeying God to the letter.
Correct.
So, yeah, so was he supposed, if God didn't say, go warn the others, that's what he didn't do. He literally obeyed what God's word.
That's right. This is why I'm pretty convinced there was an octopus on that ark, because on this hand and on the other hand and on the other hand and on the other hand, right? Or a spider, whatever, correct. He did exactly what God asked him to do. Not more, not less. He was righteous in his generation. Maybe that's all his generation was capable of. We don't really know, but there's a lot to chew on here. Susan.
So I think this is great, and I think there's, the argument for and against. Noah's condemned or criticized for not warning others. However, everyone else around him were corrupt, and I'm thinking ahead to Sodom and Gomorrah. If there were not 10 righteous people in his generation, then his not saving the other people is actually meritorious because he's saving the good if everyone else is bad. That being said, he also wasn't a prophet, so we shouldn't be burdening him with comparing him to prophets who are warning the bad or the
Right.
people not to engage in their bad ways. So I'd give Noah a free pass.
A free pass. Good. Good. Yes. Noah, right. Let's maybe we need to put him on trail, and maybe we need to take it easy on him and give him a free pass. So let's look at those. We're going to look at those exact verses about Abraham, though, as a final basis for comparison, and then we'll let Noah off the hook a little bit. Even though it doesn't come that easily, right? What does so if Noah, and I didn't bring the entire Torah portion or that whole part of the Torah portion. Noah, we've already established Noah did precisely what God asked him to do by building this ark. He walked with God, right? Skip ahead to Abraham. Abraham came forward and said, will you sweep away the innocent along with the guilty? What if there should be 50 innocent within the city? Then will you then wipe out the place and not forgive it for the sake of the innocent 50 who are in it? And for those who are unfamiliar, this is with this story, this is the story of Abraham confronting God in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And it's the beginning of the bargaining. If there aren't 50 people, maybe there are 20 or 40 or 10, right? If only there are some righteous people, God, are you going to destroy the people? And Abraham stands up to God and confronts God and says, really? You said you weren't going to destroy the world again in this week's Torah portion in Noah, but here you are ready to do it again. And Abraham speaks up to God. So what is how is Noah's response to the world situation, the troubling world situation, similar and or different from Abraham's response to his troubling world situation? Susan, go ahead.
So we went through some of this before, but I'm thinking, I just now was thinking, we're at a global scale. The world was corrupt with Noah. Sodom and Gomorrah is a place, it's a limited place that was corrupt. And when the angels went down and couldn't, first of all, they checked it out to make sure that that the whole place was corrupt. And then the kind of heinous activity that was in that town was deserving of being blown up like that. But Lot was saved, and his wife, until she looked back, and the 2 daughters were saved. So I get it with Abraham arguing with God, but I think their environments were different. With Noah, it was a global case. With Sodom and Gomorrah, it was Sodom and Gomorrah, not the whole world.
Right. Thank you for that. Absolutely. You're right. Kathleen.
I just wanted to answer your question. Obviously Noah didn't question God. He just obeyed blindly. Whereas, yep, Abraham was, questioned just like Jews question now. So, yeah.
Great.
And amazingly, God listened.
Amazingly, right?
Yeah.
Again, this is the very beginning, even the many generations later, by the time we get to Abraham, this is still this is the very beginning. First of all, it's the still relative, even Genesis 18 is relatively the very beginning of Torah. You look at it in the context of creation, it's still the beginning of creation. Everyone involved here is figuring this out. And yet, Noah, Ish Tzaddik Tamim Haya B'dorotav. He was a Tzaddik Tamim, pure. Tamim is understood as pure, a pure tzaddik in his generation. So how do we understand that? How do we understand that he was such a pure, right? Where does this land? And I want to look at one more text that isn't so much about Noah and definitely isn't about Abraham. It's not about either of them, but it's a text about this word tamim, to try and understand this a little more. And we can then apply it or not, if it doesn't work for you, to understanding Noah here and what we can take from Noah. This word tamim, what does this mean? Pure is a pretty good translation for it, but it's more than that. And for this, we turn to Rabbeinu Bachya ibn Pakuda, who was a medieval rabbi in Spain, 11th century Spain. Someone want to read Bachya ibn Pakuda here? Cindy, did you have your hand up?
No, but I'll read.
Oh, okay. I can only see a little bit because I only have one screen. Go ahead.
You should know that the precepts of the heart imply a complete harmony between our inner and outer actions. As regards the service of the Lord, till the heart and tongue and other limbs will be at one with each other, each one justifying and bearing witness in favor of the other, neither contradicting nor belying each other.
Thank you. So, and this is Rabbeinu Bachya's definition of tamim, of that word that is used to describe Noah. There is a harmony between what's inside, a complete harmony between what's inside and what's outside. So how was Noah, if you by that definition, showing a harmony between the internal and the external? And I would offer that given his generation, he did, as we already established, exactly what he was asked to do. He walked with God. I mean, walking with God is nothing to sneeze at, right? That's pretty darn good. And he did exactly what God asked him to do. And while I would love to give him a hard time because he didn't go out and warn the other people of his generation, and he didn't save them, and that is heartbreaking to read this narrative. He did what he was capable of doing from the inside out. Now, what does that say for us? To be an ish, a person who is Sadiq Tamim, a pure, I call this a person with integrity, right? A person with integrity in our generation, to be righteous with integrity. I'm not talking about people who talk the talk and don't walk the walk, but what does it mean in our generation then to be an ish tzaddik tamim, to be like Noah, but for our generation? I don't know that there's an answer to that question, but I would say that as we head into this next week where the world, certainly our country, but really the world is completely unsettled and nervous and on edge, I think there's a lesson for every single one of us as citizens, as, participants in a society, but also to keep an eye out for the leaders as well, that this is the goal that was established. Noah, in all of his faultiness, and the Torah doesn't hide that he was faulty, and the commentary doesn't hide that he was faulty, right? We love to give Noah a hard time. Noah's not our forefather, Abraham is, right? In all of his faultiness, he had some integrity and he walked with God. Again, that's nothing to sneeze at, but it was relative to where he was. So in our generation, in this week, literally in this week coming up ahead, what does it mean to be a person with integrity? And to let the insides match the outside, and to either walk with God or to walk in front of God, to walk before God. It's a high bar, but perhaps some inspiration. Any last thoughts?
Well, divorcing it from the political, and I acknowledge that, but just divorcing it from the political, we have the Torah. Neither Abraham nor Noah had the mitzvot, a set of rules to live by. And more than that, we have the Talmud to live by. So it's amazing that we have the blueprint of how to act, and if we do so with integrity, we do so not saying one thing and then cheating, when people don't see. So
Thank you for saying that. We have Torah, we have written Torah, we have oral Torah, we have all of the generations, if you're counting chronologically, which you may or may not do, but regardless, even symbolically, we have all the generations from creation to Noach to now, and all of the wisdom that has come from humanity in that time to learn how to be more righteous. And guess what? I don't want to burst anyone's bubble, but we're still kind of screwed up, right? Right. We have a lot of work to do. But we also know enough about how, from our tradition of what all of the Torah with the big capital T, right? All of Torah has to offer us about the lessons about how to be an ish tamim, tzaddik tamim, right? The ideal is there. It's ours then to step into as much as we're humanly capable of doing it. So let's do it. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat shalom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good
Shabbat
one.
shalom,
Take care.
everybody.
Shabbat shalom.
Great
Bye-bye.
Very
session.
Shalom.
informative.
Thank you.
Very
Shabbat
nice.
shalom.
Bye. Thank you. Okay,
How's she?
very good.
You think she'll keep the